Good evening, everyone. This is our 34th week. Welcome, dear Sister Oya.
Good evening, dear friends. We are reading and discussing wonderful passages that are closely related to our daily life, hence, very practical and informative.
Let's continue reading, then. We have explained how the initial components preparing the comprehension occurred during the constitution of the beings. Here, spirits were constituting these beings by gathering the energies transmitted in a disarrayed state by the developed hydrogen. The constitution of beings through these high energies, which are but high vibration complexes, triggers instincts which are the most primitive state of comprehension to manifest in these disarrayed energies. Here, secondary assistance is given as well to spirits constituting these beings. For, as previously mentioned, from the moment the being is constituted, the influences coming from above and around it, which we call secondary, takes the place of the original influences. Let us elaborate on this topic. We have said that comprehension is a power gathering matter systems together. This means that in the initial constitution of the being, hydrogen atom energies have reached such a stage of development that spirits, with the help of secondary influences as well, have attained the possibilities to use their instincts, which are the simplest state of their powers that mankind can only express and symbolize by the word comprehension, by utilizing the states of matter at this stage. Here a sufficient degree of knowledge is given about how comprehension begins. Ferment of the being is comprehension. And the initial being that constituted connects, from its initial moment on, the other simpler matter combinations and systems together in accordance with the gradual development of this ferment existing in it, that is, of comprehension, and brings about new and newer combinations and systems. We have said enough about the birth and significance of comprehension and will proceed to its role in the conscience mechanism.
If our friends read the whole book, they already know this. There is a special method of this book. First we read an introduction to a concept and in the further pages, we read more details about that concept. Then, the book revisits the initial concepts before going into another new and wider explanation of that concept. Because, this book first lays a groundwork about a concept, and with each passage, puts another layer of explanation or description, just like the layers of an onion. This book's manner of revealing knowledge progresses like this. For the newcomers, I strongly suggest watching previous videos in this series, otherwise you may get confused. Because, in this passage, we are going back to the first 70 pages of the divine order and the universe. We are reminded that the comprehension was there, at the moment, the beings were constituted or built by spirits, of course, as instincts, as the most primitive state of comprehension. So, the book reminds us once again, this almost eternal journey that started with the instincts at the constitution of the beings and continues on and now is at a higher level at the human stage. And, as we started discussing last week, we read here. Ferment of the being is comprehension. A power gathering matter systems together, interconnecting all matter parts. It is like a binding factor. Let's say, we have flour, salt, water, but in order to turn these to bread, we need a binding ingredient. This is only one of the associations this term may invoke in us. What are the associations of this word for you? Because, this book has its own particular vocabulary and its terms and concepts build a structure and new connections in our mind. Last week, we read that the cause of this power is superuniverse, and this week, we read that how this superuniverse influence, when inside this universe, becomes the power binding or interconnecting all matter.
Let me make a summary of what we read in those 50 to 70 pages of the divine order and the universe. At the initial state of the universe, matter was in an amorphous state, a state yet without form and motion. From the original principle, which is superuniverse, that is, outside of the universe, an original influence arrived at this formless matter, and motion began in matter. This original influence, when entered universe, is called prime or primary influence. As motion began, the novice spirits, please remember that they were called novice because they were inexperienced related to the matter of our universe. Yes, these novice spirits float in and around of the matter parts that are in motion. In this passive adaptation stage, spirits were not connected to matter particles, they simply shift from one matter to another, getting impressions and experiencing the substance of this universe. At that stage, development of matter was faster than the evolution of spirits in this universe, and as matter parts were becoming gathered, dissipated, formed and deformed, and were becoming developed, starting from the simple and crude to subtle and complex, the primary influences and evolutionary values were active, and when an atom is constituted by these primary influences, a spirit got evolved enough to be able to connect that atom. As matter's fast development continue, increasingly subtler and highly vibrational states of matter emerged, and within this disarrayed energy fields, spirits built a kind of body that will be in service to them until the end of this universe. This body is a gathering, an ensemble of influences and energies at a perceptual point. This body a spirit built is the being. And all beings built as such begin to exchange influences, which are called the secondary influences, and all those innumerable exchanges resulted in further formations, deformations, combinations, etc. And we read in this book how the initial hydrogen atom emerges. This is not the hydrogen atom we know in chemistry. In short, for the evolution of spirits, all those increasingly complex exchanges and formations have to occur, and consequently, an interconnecting, a guiding power is needed. As we discussed last week, comprehension was already at the constitution of the being. And as the being gets developed, its comprehension gets widened. We already mentioned this many times. And soon we will read that wherever the being directs its concentration, its comprehension is at that point. Well, we know that a major part of our being's concentration is focused on our body, more correctly, our center of consciousness, our brain and nervous system. In short, what makes us alive now as humans is this comprehension of our beings that is projected to us. It means that we are expected to make something with this ferment. We are expected to widen our comprehension at this physical level, so the comprehension of our being at that subtler energy level widens more by the experiences we have through these physical bodies lived 500 to 700 lifetimes. And all of these will be distilled into the essential knowledge that our beings will reflect back to the spirits, to those super-universe truths. And how can we apply this knowledge to our daily life? If the development of matter in this matter universe advances by the emergence of new matter combinations, then we can ask, how can we make new matter combinations? The laboratory in our hands is our body, and the matter we need to recombine is our feelings, emotions, thoughts, and imagination. Yes, because they are matter as well. And, for ages, all esoteric and spiritual teachings advised human beings to work on their inner worlds, on their power of imaginations. I think these were all interconnected in that sense, widening our comprehension, first about our own body, about our own self. The best example I can think of is from the neurology. We now know that the neurons in our brain make new connections as we really work for changing our habitual ways of thinking and acting. Also, we now know that emotions and feelings have their own particular frequencies, and we can easily deduce that we can widen our comprehension not acting from the low-frequency states like fear, anger, etc., but acting from the high-frequency states such as love, compassion, tolerance, etc. That is why the conscience and comprehension advance in tandem.
Yes, you made such nice connections between what we read in this book so far and what we read last week and today. And what you said about bringing out new combinations of matter is so important. And the people who spend efforts for working on their self, on their inner world know very well that these new combinations are an endless process. Because with each insight, each discovery, we replace previous ingredients with the new ones, and the ferment of our current level of comprehension brings out new expansions in new combinations. But of course, this does not happen by only reading or studying books. Of course, this lays a ground in us to build upon, but if we can apply the knowledge in the midst of life, of relations with others, then this is much more valuable for us, for our being. Why? Because as we work harder on observing and knowing ourself, we simply reach up for the subtler matter combinations of our organism and other energy layers of our body. And you know, we frequently use this wonderful phrase as we study Gurdjieff's fourth way teaching. I use my right not to be negative. In other words, even though I live in this world of crude matter, I choose using subtler matter combinations. For example, if you experience something negative, try to remember that the source of this negativity is within you. General tendency is to blame external sources, conditions, and other people for the negative things happen to us. Yes, such an impression may be coming from outside, but it is a reflection of our inner state. If we cannot discern this, such seemingly outsourced impressions add negative values to our duality unit's earthly cravings component. So, the best remedy is to remember this fact, and try as much as we can to strive for inviting subtle and subtler vibrations and influences to our organism.
One of our friends asked, "Is this ferment a part of the super-universe truths?" I wanted to reply this now, because it is better to firmly establish this in our minds. No, we cannot say the ferment is a part of a spirit or spirits. Let's remember what we read in the previous pages. Comprehension is a power interconnecting the endless matter systems in the matter universe. However, by making this definition, it should be remembered that as for everything in universe, the cause of this power is also outside the matter universe. Please remember that the relations between spirits' beings' bodies are via induction, not direct, always indirect, by the influences over magnetic fields of beings. And this power takes the form of comprehension within our universe, and even this form is a reflection, a mirrored symbol of the power itself. Let's discern this.
About this power's binding character, an example popped up in my mind. Maybe this example brings the issue at hand down to the physical level, but still. The moment Tülin read the question, as though the brain cell beings in my brain begin to gather all relevant information, and my consciousness, as a brain-based reflection of my comprehension, puts forth ideas to combine as a reply to this question. So, in a way, I brought out a new matter combination. I don't know if this is a relevant reply to the question, but I'd like to share it anyway.
Just like your example, the being also uses some gathering mechanisms to build a body in the crude matter. The being sends influences to the newly forming brain structure of the fetus in the mother's womb, via the magnetic field synthesis of the brain cells beings of the previous body. This is also a gathering and interconnecting mechanism. The point we need to be careful is this sentence. Comprehension is a power gathering matter systems together. Matter systems. It is about our universe, not about others. If you remember, we already read in this book that each universe has a different substance, and there is no connection and relation between universes, and we cannot know the states and substances of those universes. Well, to be honest, we could discover only 4% of our matter universe yet. Even the information and knowledge we could get from this small percentage baffle and amaze us. Yes, let's continue reading. First of all, we would like to state that the role of comprehension in the conscience mechanism is intrinsic to the disposition of this mechanism. 4. Actually, establishment and connections of relations between the opposites of the conscience mechanism occur through the comprehension mechanism, and it is even an act belonging to the function of comprehension. Naturally, this act occurs rather through the interventions of assisting influences at the moment of being's initial constitution, and gradually, as comprehension develops, these interventions lessen and governance of the being emerges, and, at the further states of development of comprehension, it completely prevails over conscience. Proper appreciation of the interrelations between the conscience realities, establishment of supporting systems for them with sublime components by discerning the duty components with elevating quality towards the higher, from the earthly craving components, and by this, elevation of the equilibrium of conscience mechanism increasingly towards higher levels. These are the acts belonging to the function of comprehension. Therefore, the more perfect comprehension becomes, the more efficient this function works, and consequently, the easier and faster the convergence of the conscience level becomes towards the knowledge of duty. For example, A man who has such a wide and encompassing comprehension knows better if he should direct his efforts to the duty component or the earthly craving component. And when he complies with the duty component, which is positive, he starts to appreciate what kind of sublime matter combinations and systems he can build onwards, and this means his increasing convergence, with his comprehension, towards the plan of duty. On the other hand, as he chooses the earthly craving component, which is the opposite of duty, and as he goes downward, he sees and understands what kind of dissolutions and breakdowns will occur in the high-ordered relations within the constitutions of conscience and what kinds of values can be lost from the richness of developmental combinations of matter. 4. Appreciation of these is among the acts included in the comprehension's scope of power as the builder among the matter combinations and systems. Therefore, comprehension is such a great power that it is both its own guide and also its own prime mover at all preliminary levels on the path of preparing for the knowledge of duty throughout all the lives it will go through, within the dictates of conscience duality. And this expresses that among other components of matter universe, it is the closest vehicle to spirit.
Yes, in this passage, we read about all those states and stages spirit and matter had up to this point. We started from the initial motion and form of matter, eventually, we reached the state of being, and we had experiences and applications throughout many lifetimes, and starting from a certain point in this almost eternal process of development, we acquired a degree of free will to choose and decide from either the earthly craving side or the duty side of the conscience mechanism. Until that point and degree, our acts and deeds followed some sequence of passive adaptations, instincts, first heavy and later, increasingly lighter automatisms, intuitions, and semi-comprehending acts. And as we went through, experienced and lived the consequences of all those heavy or crude or low matter vibrations of the lower component of the conscience mechanism, namely, of the earthly cravings, we also got the intuitions of the higher component, namely, of duty, and we also began to reach up for the subtler vibrations of higher realities. And, here, as human beings, as we understand the consequences of choosing and acting from either side, our comprehension widens, and as our comprehension widens, the development of our being advances, and the quality and scope of the essential knowledge our being reflects back to its, more correctly, to our spirit, increase, as well. We said this many times before, but still, I'd like to repeat, once more, the more we work on ourself, the wider our vessel to receive more of the sublimating influences, the more we become a vehicle for the widening of our comprehending part, the more we will see as the factor orienting us towards the duty.
Yes, we read here. The role of comprehension in the conscience mechanism is intrinsic to the disposition of this mechanism. 4. Actually, establishment and connections of relations between the opposites of the conscience mechanism occur through the comprehension mechanism, and it is even an act belonging to the function of comprehension. And we summarize this important knowledge as comprehension and conscience advance in tandem. Or, in other words, the wider our comprehension, the more the conscientious development is. Another important expression in this passage is, naturally, this act occurs rather through the interventions of assisting influences at the moment of being's initial constitution, and gradually, as comprehension develops, these interventions lessen and governance of the being emerges, and, at the further states of development of comprehension, it completely prevails over conscience. As you mentioned, the interventions like heavy automatism gets lessen and lighter as our comprehensions get wider through all those lifetimes. And please do not dwell on the number of those lifetimes. Knowing their exact number is not so important. The important thing is all those lifetimes prepare us to the plan of duty, and this preparation requires the widening of our comprehension. And how we do this? By bringing out more and subtler matter combinations, and by gleaning the essence of the experiences and values out of matter as though squeezing water out of it, which brings us to the topic of essence knowledge. Another interesting expression is at the third paragraph. Comprehension is such a great power that it is both its own guide and also its own prime mover. Well, let's say we completed a lifetime, be it 4th or 400th, and we die. After the death of our body, our being becomes isolated within a state, called spatium, and we do a great accounting by comparing the knowledge we acquired in the previous lifetimes and the knowledge we gained in that life just ended. And as the result of this accounting, if there are missing points or unfinished business at that last lifetime, the comprehension is the factor that will active the organizations allowing the completion of those missing points. Also, the factor causing the being to make those choices. Also, the factor that lays the ground for building the body to be utilized in the next lifetime, etc., etc. So, the comprehension is a power that guides and moves itself. And as you mentioned, as our comprehension widens, the being's inclusion or participation of all those processes increase. At first, the beings in duty makes the choices that are most suitable for the being's further development, but because the purpose is to make the being more aware and comprehending about the consequences of its choices, therefore, after many lifetimes of suffering consequences of choices from the earthly craving side of the conscience mechanism, the being becomes able to use its free will more and more. There are many clues in this passage, but most striking one is, comprehension is the closest vehicle to spirit. Alright, let's continue reading. Now, we come to the essence knowledge feeding the mechanisms of comprehension and conscience which take such a significant role in the preparations belonging to the plan of duty in the world. First of all, let us say that essence knowledge, as it feeds comprehension and conscience, is also enriched by comprehension and conscience. Essence knowledge increases its value by comprehension itself and also with the help of external interventions. As to the topic of these external interventions strengthening essence knowledge, knowledge has been given previously on this, to which we now return. Interventions helping the increase of essence knowledge, in relation to conscience, reach their targets by utilizing innumerable states and situations of myriad matter combinations, that is, a great number of events. Events, as filtered through crude knowledge of comparison, exit from consciousness to unconsciousness and stay there. These are under the command of essence knowledge, and they exist there, in the unconscious, throughout the lifetime of mankind. These have not yet passed to the subconscious. Events cannot directly pass into the state of essence knowledge. 4. There are yet inconsistencies among them. These events that occurred in the consciousness, after their initial comparative accounting is done with the relatively crude material impressions in the unconscious, are pushed to the unconscious. Although these are under the command of the essence being, they have not yet been its own possessions, have not yet turned into essence knowledge. For this knowledge in the unconscious to pass into the state of essence knowledge, they need to adapt to essence knowledge, and to reach the ability to be included within the essence knowledge synthesis. However, the comparative accounting of these in the unconscious has been done not with subconscious knowledge but with unconscious knowledge, and this is not essence knowledge. Because all connections of the being to outside will be severed when it passes to the spatium following death, this knowledge will be compared with subconscious knowledge and accounted by the being, and after that will pass to the subconscious and be appropriated by the being. 4. This act will harmonize the knowledge in the subconscious with the knowledge in the unconscious and will mix these within the synthesis of subconscious knowledge. So, the knowledge that stays unconscious throughout the whole of a life enters the subconscious only after going through the great accountancy following the death event and after it has been represented by the being, it can then enter the subconscious. As to the topic of how knowledge is collected in the unconscious, this is accumulated by subjecting world realities which are comprehended or not by the consciousness to the knowledge of the comparison mechanism in relation to conscience, which is broadly done during sleep, and is then pushed to the unconscious.
Well, last week, one of our friends was asking about the essential knowledge. I hope she or can watch this recording, because, in this passage, we have a complete explanation. So, once again, we read this phrase of feeding. Essence knowledge, as it feeds comprehension and conscience, is also enriched by comprehension and conscience. So this is, again, a two-sided process in tandem. And the most important point. Everything we learn and experience through events in life is not essence knowledge. All information and knowledge we acquire in a lifetime is recorded and restored, but all of these must go through some filtration mechanisms before they transformed into essential knowledge. So, in this passage, we read about these mechanisms. First, the knowledge of all events we live get filtered through crude knowledge of comparison. Later, all of these exits from our consciousness and pass to the unconsciousness to be processed in an initial comparative accounting, and then, they stay there throughout our lifetime. Of course, these are under the command of our being. They are not yet properly owned by it because they need further processing to be able to get included in the essence knowledge of our being. So, these are still unconscious knowledge, not essence knowledge. Only after death of our body and when our being becomes isolated in the spatium phase, in other words, only after the great accounting period, these become essence knowledge. Of course, we cannot see which part of the things we learn and experience in life will become essence knowledge, but our being knows. But we will read more clues about this in the further pages. Yes, I admire this book's method of teaching. Concepts are explained in ever-widening layers, and as we go deeper into the meanings, all questions becomes answered one by one. In this passage, we read the explanations about what is the purpose of our bodily life, why we need to experience events, how the knowledge and information we acquired in life gets transformed into essential knowledge after our body dies, and how our being utilizes our former knowledge and experience for building a new body for the next incarnation.
Yes, we had read passages on death, dying in spatium in our previous videos, and the book reminds the connections of these with the comprehension and essence knowledge. Especially important point is the disconnection of the external influences when the being becomes isolated in the spatium period. And the defense mechanisms we use while alive don't function there. And, if you remember, the subconscious is a closed system that contains all the knowledge and information of all those previous lifetimes the being lived through via the bodies it built. And this closed system is accessible only under certain conditions. And one of these conditions is the dream mechanism. This is what I call daily accounting period for our being.
Yes, it is said that the sleep is a small death, and the death is a long sleep. So, during each sleep period a synthesis occurs and an existential analysis is done by our being. We may seem inert and resting as we sleep, but actually there is always motion, movement, and activity for us. However, we humans have a tendency for stability and dormancy. But our being finds ways to remind us the exact opposite, telling to our organism, "You are born to act, to be active, to move on and about, both inside and outside. You will be experimenting, experiencing, acting, doing. You will be living in the midst of myriad event of life." And by the nudging of those influences from our being we go in and out of innumerable states, we react and respond, receive impressions. And all of these becomes processed and reflected to our being as essence knowledge. Then, the gist of these experiences is reflected to us as new experiences, new events, new possibilities for development. I mean, our being is not separate from us, and we are not separate from our being. We are becoming developed hand in hand.
As you said, the whole system works so magnificently efficient that if we cannot actualize a part of our life plan, all incoming influences become rearranged to make sure the desired and intended outcome. I mean, there is no escape. We will either get developed or get developed. We simply live the consequences of the choices we made from either the earthly craving side or the duty side of the conscience mechanism, and the intensity of the suffering depends on the side of this developmental mechanism we choose from. Therefore, we must know that sufferings and hardships in our lives are the consequences of our previous choices, not the punishments from gods. But this is the fact we tend to close our eyes tight, eh? We cannot wake up to this fact, instead we keep on blaming others and external situations, etc. This reminds me Gurdjieff's teachings, saying, "Man is a machine, man is asleep, life happens to man." You mentioned that we are born to be active both in our inner and outer reality, so we must spend efforts to discover where in life we are, so to speak, in deep sleep paralysis, so we can break those chains holding us inactive, stuck, and asleep. Alright, let's continue reading. In short, comprehended or not, events the consciousness has encountered are concluded by the knowledge of comparison in the unconscious, and these conclusions stay in the unconscious. There, these have not yet become the essence knowledge of the being, and therefore they do not belong to the subconscious. Nevertheless, this knowledge is under the command of the being, and whenever necessary, it can be taken out to the field of consciousness. And only after the great accounting that is done following death, does it mix with the mass of essence knowledge in the subconscious. Sources and means feeding essence knowledge vary greatly. We will state some of the most important of these: communal situations like knowledge, religion, nation, family, and the states strengthening these situations, and finally, communiqués, inspirations, knowledge given to mankind and mediums directly by beings in duty at various levels, and events arising from all of these are among the powerful materials strengthening essence knowledge and converging the being with the plan of duty. These are lived through within the world realities and, as we said, after some acts, they mix with the essence knowledge repertoire of the being. Now, let us elaborate on essence knowledge.
I think, before the disclosure of this book, there has not been such a concept as essence knowledge. As we read this book, we learn more and more about this concept, a structure, mechanism, or system that acquiring and accumulating information and knowledge from the cruder levels of matter via the vehicles or bodies of beings, and transforming these by several filtration mechanisms into incomprehensibly subtler combinations of matter, or maybe I should say, of energy. All you can think of as learning, all states, all events, and not only the ones we personally experience but also the ones our family, community, nation, country experience, as well. You know, when people say everything is an illusion, I think to myself that it is because we are not disillusioned enough. For example, an event happens and the nation, almost as a whole, reacts in the same way, especially in an emotional manner. Every member of that nation thinks the same, etc. At such instances, each of us becomes identified with the reaction of the others, and our nationwide reaction is only automatic, not comprehending. Yes, even that experience is reflected to our being, and when the outcome or destined results of this is reflected back to us, it happens correspondingly, at an automatic level. However, as an individual, as our capacity of comprehension increases, as we start to think differently, to see such events from different perspectives, in short, as we begin to assess events differently, then we can discern the choices within these settings of events by the system more easily. So, as you watch the next breaking news on TV, please try to remember this and ask yourself, do I go along with the others' reactions? Do I pause to gather all possible facts of the event before I react? In other words, which comprehension particles or influences we let into our organism. Because the quality of the information we are inclined to hear and learn about will pave the way of the future settings of events we will live through.
Another important point in this passage. Yes, all knowledge and information about this current life is accumulated in the unconscious, but these are still under the control of the being. And if necessary, they may be taken up to the field of consciousness. And also, it is important that the subconscious is a closed system, that the past life materials cannot be recalled. Had we remember all information from those 500 to 700 lifetimes, we couldn't live this current life. Yet, if necessary for a being's development. If it is necessary to take some impressions from the past lives. The beings in duty or guiding beings may influence this process, and in some recurring or deeply impressive dreams or during breathwork or meditating, under hypnosis or in a regression therapy session, some of this knowledge from the materials in the subconscious may surface to be worked on. But this happens only if it is necessary for the being's development. One of our dear friends asks, can't we learn what these essence knowledge are by using a method like hypnosis, regression, etc.? Then, we can live accordingly. The purpose is not to know or learn the essence knowledge to live by these. Our purpose is to generate essence knowledge by living our life plan. And we already read and discussed that not every minute detail of a lifetime becomes the essence knowledge. No. Such details are not reflected to our being, only deep impressions are reflected to our being.
Therefore, instead of trying to discover our past lives just out of curiosity, we can spend our energy and time in a more productive way. You know, it is said that the situation we are in now is the best situation. Then, let's try to discover what is the focus of our life. Which level of vibrations attract us? What kind of influences we open ourselves to or invite into our inner world? We know that whatever we need for the development of our being, we live and experience it here and now. If it is really necessary to discover things for this development, then, be sure that you will be guided towards such methods. In that sense, we are never alone. We are always supported by the influences from our being, after all.
Another question came. What about the impressions belonging to our future lifetimes? Are they also stored or recorded in the subconscious? Or in the unconscious? There are explorative sessions that are called progression sessions in regression therapy. And, I think my dear sister Oya will agree with me that, information acquired in such sessions may not be reliable. The reason is, nothing is written in stone. Let's say, you had a progression session and discovered some details. However, you are still alive and there will be many experiences and events you have to go through, according your choices and decisions. And after you die, then all knowledge you acquired in that lifetime will be assessed, and if there are missing points, then your being will outline the next life plan with those necessities and needs. You can understand that the information you received in that progression session while you were alive may be more or less different than the life plan outlined by your being for the next body it will build. Of course, some clues and insights can be acquired by such methods, but considering these as fixed and need to be facts may be wrong. Because, later we will read in the divine order and the universe that the time of death for a person can change, depending on the efforts of that person, on his or her level of comprehension and awareness around such destined time. So, see, nothing is written in stone. Please do not consider that future lives are arranged in a fixed way. Yes, the being's time comprehension is spherical. All those lifetimes occur at once for the being, but our time comprehension is superficial and we perceive all those lifetimes in a sequence. And we must remember that no matter how hard you try to receive information from that closed system called the subconscious, you still have to use the emotional and mental imagery recorded in your unconscious. Your brain will use these to make that information perceivable for you. In short, things can happen only within the capacity of our brains.
Yes, as you said, the knowledge in our hands tells us that life plan may be revised. Let's say, the time of death was determined, but it may be that by spending efforts for development, the progress of our lifetime contained more than initially planned. Or, by deciding to take on or finish more than we initially planned, our time of death may change. Such revisions or changes can be influenced by our being and the guiding beings in duty. Not necessarily valid for all of us. So, let's focus on what we really can do, instead of speculating. We are responsible from the knowledge and situation within that moment, and the only thing we need to be sure is we did the best we could in a day when we put our head to the pillow. Instead of justifications and reprieve, do we really feel the inner peace of choosing from the upper component of the conscience mechanism? Or, if we work for self-knowledge and discover the points we need to complete or start, such small leaps of awareness may help us to change our route in life. As to this wish of knowing future, well, as Tülin said, we don't think this is beneficial for our development. All of us have this tendency, knowing future and acting accordingly. That's why fortune-telling, coffee cup reading, etc., are so common in almost all cultures. As we spend energy, time and money to know about our future, life brings forth such different events on our path that we find ourselves in situations and states we even couldn't imagine. Only in hindsight, we understand that those unexpected events have been what we really needed at the time. So, instead of knowing all future steps we will take, let's focus on the steps we take now, because it seems that our being's development is all about how we walk our path as it unfolds with each step we take. I think we can surely say about future that our seemingly individual paths always will be converged and joined with others' individual paths, because we are responsible for supporting each other as beings, as well. So, let's spend efforts to live our life plans, as they reveal moment by getting clues from studying our impressions, dreams, and the events we encounter.
Yes, dear Sister Oya, if we can visualize the number of each individual path, then we can see and understand the immense scope of the comprehensions and realities. Because each one of us is different, I mean, the equipage we are born with is different for each of us. Because the essence knowledge of my being is different than Oya's being, we are here and now together but reflect our own essence knowledge in a different way or manner. That's the reason of this world's richness. Our differences enrich the life, hence, the development of our beings. And within this pot of different realities and comprehensions, we can see the importance of discernment. We must work harder for choosing better as we feed our organism, hence, our being with the impressions and experiences we acquire. We must use our comprehension and conscience as we choose, as we decide. Because only by doing this, we can gradually leave behind that sweeping effect of automatisms. We must be discerning to get out of automatism. Otherwise, we will be driven. However, the purpose for the being is to widen its comprehension so it can drive its own development. Yes, with these words, let me say good evening, dear friends. Hoping to see you next week.
We thank you so much, dear friends, for your attendance, for your questions and comments. See you next week.